everybody. And today we have a very interesting topic, which is going to be how to get started in podcasting. Right now, I'm over 250 episodes of the Lawyer Lifestyle podcast, and we're going through the personal branding portion of the podcast. And I wanted to talk about my favorite part of having a personal brand, which is podcasting. So I wanted to welcome everybody in. Thanks for joining me today. This podcast, a Lawyer Lifestyle podcast, takes you on a daily journey to discover key principles in the areas of marketing, sales, and leadership for attorneys. As I mentioned, today's topic is how to get started in podcasting. And we're going to be going through Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crushing It. And I'm going to add in my own experience on how podcasting has changed my life and how easy it is to do podcasting. So Gary Vee talks about there are three ways or three reasons why you might want to have a podcast as your pillar platform for your personal brand. And for those of you who haven't watched this video series before or listened to my podcast before, what we're doing is we're going through the various social media platforms to help you determine which should be your pillar, which should be the one that you go all in on, which one should you spend the most time and your most money on, frankly. So today we're going to talk about podcasting and why you might want to have a podcast as your pillar. So I think there are three reasons. Number one, of course, the obvious one is maybe you're not great on camera or you have no interest in having a video feed. Or maybe the technical details of video might get in your way of producing content. I know lawyers especially are perfectionists. So if you think you're going to be a perfectionist in terms of lighting and how your hair looks, how you look on camera, then having a video show probably isn't for you. But if you're someone who can talk, and if you're a lawyer, you definitely can talk well, right? Then podcasting might be just the right platform for you. Number two, podcasts can be accessed anywhere, and you can listen to a podcast while you're doing anything. I was recently talking to my wife, and I mentioned that she listens to music all the time while she's in the car, but I actually listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm in the car. I'm not sure why that is. I said, well, maybe it's just because I like to hear people talking to me, or I feel lonely in the car. I don't know what the reason is, but it's so easy to learn information, to be entertained through voice, through a podcast. And so there's so many ways and so many situations in which you can listen to a podcast. You can listen while you're driving. You can listen while you're doing something else, multitasking, while you're checking emails, while you're paying bills, no matter doing your taxes, no matter what you're doing, you can listen to a podcast. And guess what? If you get to a point where the podcast is interfering with what you're doing and multitasking, you can just press pause. When you get back to a place that you're ready to listen again, then you can hit that play button once again. So it's so easy to go on and off on a podcast, and you're not going to miss a word. And so it's a great way to get your content out there because there are so many people that listen to podcasts. The third reason is that you can change your format and develop your podcast over time. I think people sometimes have they feel like they can't come up with their idea of what they want to do because they think that they're going to be just set. Like, I'm going to do an interview podcast, or I'm going to do a game show type podcast, or I'm going to just talk with my friends in a podcast. Guess what? Your podcast can change over time in who hosts it, who your guests are, and what the content could be, and even what the format is. So look at Gary Vee and the way that he did his podcast. He started off with just the audio from the Gary Vee show. And the Gary Vee show, or the Ask Gary Vee show, that changed over time as well. So it started as a video show. Gary came on the air and actually answered questions from Twitter. He had somebody ask him questions, and then he was off the cuff give answers, right? That developed into an interview show and lots of other things. And they would strip out the audio from the Ask Gary Vee show video show, and he would just insert that into the podcast feed, and that would be the podcast. Well, that changed over time, of course, and it became the the Gary Vee audio experience, right? And so, yes, it was still the audio from Ask Gary Vee show, but then it became things like, clips from meetings that he might have, or keynote addresses that he has on there. He also has just random audio where maybe he's getting on and off of a plane, and he's just video or just recording his thoughts, right? that's part of his podcast as well. So his content and his format has changed over time, and it might change per day, right? So you get to be very flexible. And so the question that you might be asking is, well, what should you podcast about? If you decide that audio podcasting is the right way for you to go, what might you podcast about? And as I've been saying throughout this, going through this book and throughout this personal branding discussion, you want to make content based upon your passion, which essentially means whatever you're interested about, whatever you love, right? It could be video games. It could be reading. It could be novels. It could be taekwondo or hockey or basketball. It could be a number of different things. And so whatever you love, that's what you should create audio podcasts about. And so you're asking yourself, well, how does that relate to being a lawyer? Well, look, if people listen to your podcast and they're really interested in and look at what you do and what your passion is, they have an affinity for that as well. They're going to go and they're going to look back and say, who is this guy? Who is this podcaster? I think he's really great. I think he has a really great personality. I'd like to work with him. And then they look and they say, oh, he's a lawyer. That's so interesting. And he's a lawyer in my community. So maybe I'll give him a call if I have a case or I need a will done or whatever you do substantively in the law. You can help them with that as well. And people will reach out. That's exactly what happened with Gary Vee. He started out in the wine category. Now he's talking entrepreneurship and business. And of course, his niche is social media advertising. And he's a social media agency. Now he's a sports agency and a bunch of other businesses as well. But interestingly enough, people will look to him and will be interested in what his passion is. And he will people will hire him, will hire his digital marketing agency because they're so interested in his content. So think about what your passion is and build your podcast around that. Now, how do you get started in a podcast? Well, there are a number of different classes, a number of different courses that you can take. And I will give you the same advice that Gary Vee has been giving on his podcast for years. And that is the easiest way to make a podcast is through an app called Anchor. It's a free app, and it's so easy to use. And I'll just give you a little tour of my dashboard so you can see what's going on. So let me share my screen so you can see everything that I see and how easy it is to make a podcast. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And for those of you who are listening on my podcast, please head over to my YouTube channel, search Dave Scriven-Young, and you'll find my video, right? So here's my screen. Here's my dashboard. So it's so easy to use. So all you have to do, so you can see, you put in a title, you put in a description, you have a picture. So this is literally my firm bio picture that I've used. So easy. It's stuff that you're ready have on hand. And to build your podcast, all you have to do is just sign up. And then you put in your title and your description, your picture, and you're all set to go, right? How do you record an episode? Well, I can tell you that I just record it on my phone. There's an Anchor app that I use that's so easy, but I'll just show you on how to do it on the desktop. So all you have to do is click new episode. You literally will click record, and you hit start record, and you're plugged into your computer on your headset, and you just start recording. It's so easy. When you're done, you press stop. It'll show up on the right-hand side here where it says your episode, and you press save, and it's ready to go. You'll put in your description, you'll put in your title for your episode, and it'll all be right there. So it's so easy to record, so easy to make a description for what you want, and it gets out there. So the question is, how does it get distributed? Well, the greatest thing about Anchor is that it does it for you. So when you create your podcast, you basically will see all of the various options on how to get on the platforms, how to get on various platforms. So let's go to my podcast, and you'll be able to see all of the places that I'm on. So we'll view the public site. So this is anchor.fm/attorneydsy. This is what it looks like. So it shows my last episode, which was Instagram personal branding tips, right? you can see all the places where you can listen to my podcast. Well, of course, you can listen to it on Anchor, which is what you're saying right now. You can go on Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Google Music Play, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Stitcher, and then there's an RSS feed. So many different places where my podcast gets distributed. It's so great and it's so easy to use. And so what the great thing is when you publish an episode, poof, right? Anchor will just distribute this content for you. So easy, so great. I cannot recommend this highly enough. The other things that I want to show you very quickly is you can see on the dashboard, and the one thing that I think people complain about mostly is the statistics, right? So you can see my statistics for my podcast over time. And yes, I think it comes from Stitcher in particular, or excuse me, Spotify, because Spotify, I believe, owns Anchor. You can see your top episodes. You can see where your listeners come from. I come predominantly from the United States. Listening platforms, where it comes from, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and others. You can see the age of the people, and this is where the source of Spotify. You can see the age of the folks who watch my podcast or listen to my podcast, as well as male, female, non-binary, non-specified, etc. So I think this is probably where the app fails a little bit, and that it doesn't give you sort of the most, a lot of the detail-oriented statistics that other platforms might give you. But for someone like you who's maybe just getting started in the podcast game, you don't need it, right? You don't need it just to start off. What you need to do is you need to get your content out there. The other thing that you can see on this is total plays. You can see your estimated audience size, and you can see money in your wallet, which you get that from a couple of different ways. One is from sponsorships. The other one is, so right now you can see that my podcast is sponsored by Anchor. And then you can also see where, folks are essentially like a Patreon where they can pay money every month just to help you out. And I actually have one person that does that, a good friend of mine, attorney friend of mine who lives in Chicago. Great guy. So this is it. I mean, this is really the easiest thing about podcasting is setting it up, getting it ready to go. So my question for you is, and for your daily action item, I want you to think about, what are you going to do about getting your podcast put together? What your passion is. How you know? It's because you do it all the time. Whether that's playing piano, whether that's watching, specific Netflix show, whatever it is, whatever your passion is, that should be what your podcast is about. And the best way that I found, the easiest way to do it, is through Anchor. And I know a lot of people might disagree, but I can tell you, 262 episodes later of my podcast, I've had very few problems, and it's been distributing my content without fail for all 262 episodes. So I want to thank you for joining the podcast today. If you like this show, please go, and wherever you're going to be listening to this podcast, please rate and review. The other thing I would say is, if you want to reach out to me, there are a couple of ways to do that. If you're want to join the discussion, if you will, you can leave me a voicemail. One of the great things that you can do on Anchor is you can leave someone a voicemail for them to play on the show. I encourage you to do that by going to anchor.fm/attorneydsy and hitting that message button. You can leave me a comment for me to play on the show, or a question for me to answer. You could also leave me a comment or question on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @AttorneyDSY. I'm also on LinkedIn on my personal profile. So let me know if you have any comments about this episode. Tell me what you think about this podcast, or give me a topic you'd like to hear about. This podcast is going to be on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast. You saw them all, right? Please be sure to subscribe and rate and review. I also want to invite you to the other thing that I do, which is the Lawyers Emotional Intelligence Book Club. We're going to be starting off with Dr. Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication. The next session will be Wednesday, July 22nd at 7 p.m. Central. You can find out more at facebook.com/lawyerseq. So have a great day or night, and remember to fight for the lifestyle that you want and become the rainmaker